Okay. Gemara Bava Kamma daf tzadi aleph amud bet. The context in this Gemara is the halacha of bal tashchit, which is the famous idea that you're not allowed to destroy something wantonly. And the example given in the Torah is with a fruit-bearing tree, right? Like Adam etz hasadeh, you're not allowed to cut down a fruit-bearing tree. So the sugya in Bava Kamma here deals with the halachic discussion, and we'll touch on a few of the halachot. But then it transitions into a much broader discussion about, we know that you're not allowed to destroy a fruit-bearing tree, but are there exceptions, and when are there exceptions, and is there something broader that the Torah is trying to teach us by saying we're not allowed to destroy fruit-bearing trees? So we'll look at some examples from some other Gemaras in Bava Batra, and we'll analyze a very, very mysterious statement, a half-liner by Rabbi Chanina, about somebody who dies mysteriously, and it's not at all clear what's being discussed or who's being discussed. So we'll look at various mefarshim and see how they understand it, and then we'll end off with some nice messages or ethical ideas about what the idea behind Ki Adam etz hasadeh is really all about. Okay, so let's begin. The Gemara Bava Kamma daf tzadi aleph amud bet. So as we said, this is starting from a halachic discussion, so we'll just learn that to get the context. Amarav dikla de ta'an kaba asur limkatzatzei. So the question is, what volume of fruit is the minimum volume for it to qualify as a tree that you're not allowed to cut down? Right? If I have one tiny apple, so is that considered enough? So Rav says when it comes to a dikla, which is a palm tree, so once it produces at least a kav of fruit, so then you're not allowed to cut it down anymore. That's the volume, a kav's worth of fruit. The Gemara asks, Meitve, kami bezayit v'lo yikatzatzenu. So there's a braita which says, how much volume does an olive tree have to produce in order for you not to, for it to fall under the prohibition of atashki, not allowed to cut it down? Rova, a quarter of a kav.
You wait 3 years to eat it.
That's true. You have to wait 3 years to eat it. That's orla. Until you're allowed to eat it.
Until it's an adult tree.
Until it's an adult tree. Yeah, good. Until the tree is old enough that you're allowed to eat from it. But here, right? Good.
Did I cause you to laugh?
This is the top of the door. He's not holding.
We'll catch you up afterwards. Okay. So here we're not discussing adult trees. We're discussing the minimum volume of a tree for it to fall under the prohibition about tashchit. So by an olive tree, it says a quarter of a kav. So isn't that a contradiction?
We actually have one.
So what?
We have one.
A baby tree?
Yeah.
Hopefully one day it'll grow into an adult tree. That's right. Shani zeitim, an olive tree is different to chashive. What's the difference? Because olives. Okay, 1 second. Because olives are important, right? Olives are a fruit in of their own. Specifically, olives have a specific chashivut. So the minimum volume considered to be, now this is a fruit-bearing tree that has the chashivut to fall under the prohibition of tashchit, is less than by other trees, for example, a palm tree. So we see it's not the volume that's kovea, but rather the type of tree. Each one has its own volume.
It's funny, I thought that the issue of cutting down trees, whether it could have fruit or not if it has fruit now.
Right.
When we were growing up, I remember we had a tree, no fruit, but it was like, we can't cut it down.
Right.
Now can I tell you about my tree?
It's to have fruit on it, not to cut it down.
That's a good question. From this sugya, it doesn't appear that that's the case.
It's like a future potential type, because otherwise you could just cut it down and use the fruit. No, that's good.
This sugya talks about all the halachot of this. I'm not as familiar with the nuances there. Based on this, it seems that yes, just try to say quiet. Okay, please. All right, but we can check afterwards. In any event, we'll see soon something that's related to the point that you're raising. Okay, okay. So based on this, we see that you can't cut it down once it reaches a certain volume. Amar Rabbi Chanina taught lo Shakhiv Shivhat Beri ela deketz Taantã bilo zmana. This is the mysterious line I was talking about earlier. So Rabbi Chanina said, Shivhat Beri. Okay, so let's assume for now, even though we'll discuss this soon, that Beri means son. So my son Shivhat did not die. Ela deketz Taantã bilo zmana, except for the fact that he cut down a fig tree before its time. Okay? And then Amar Ravina, and this is classic Gemara, right? So you have this statement, Rabbi Chanina's son passed away because he cut down a fig tree too early. What does that mean? And then Rabbi Chanina, V'ima ya me'uleh b'dami mutar. So Rabbi Chanina says this whole prohibition around Bal Tashchit is only the case if it's not a financial loss for you. But he qualifies and says if the lumber, for example, of the tree is more valuable to you than the fruits would be, then you're allowed to cut it down. In other words, he kind of negates the spirit of the halakha here, of the idea. Excuse me, not the halakha. The idea that fruit-bearing trees. In other words, the question is it prohibited to cut down a fruit-bearing tree because there's something inherently sacred or important about the fact that it's a fruit-bearing tree, or is it that you're not supposed to wantonly destroy something for no reason? But if you have a reason to do it, then that's not a problem anymore. So Ravina, by saying that imaya b'muleh b'damim mutar, is implying that you can't just go destroy fruit trees for no good reason, or in the context of the Torah, just maybe to starve out your enemies. But if it's for your own financial benefit, to cut it down so that you can use it for parnasah, so then it's permitted. Okay, so he would seem to go in that camp, versus perhaps, I would argue, Rabbi Chanina, who's making a larger, almost meta-halachic point, where he says, my son died for cutting down a fig tree before its time, even if perhaps it was something that was technically halachically permissible,
like ethically,
but there's something about it that's just wrong, right? And so there's repercussions, and there's something that's outside the bounds of halacha here that we need to be mindful of. Okay, so there's perhaps a machloket here between Rabbi Chanina and Ravina in that sense. Okay, Tani Nami Hachi is similar. Yeah.
I think it was Darmabel who used to steal less than you were allowed to steal. Like not wrong, but like
right. It's out
punishable, but it's like not acceptable.
Yeah, right. It's kind of okay. Are you abiding by the letter of the law? If it's meuleh b'damim, yes. Are you abiding by the spirit of the law? Perhaps not. Right. You shouldn't be excited to go cut down a fruit tree just because it's something that is permitted by Ravina's qualification, and maybe that's what Rabbi Chanina is getting to. Your point. Yeah. Okay. Tani nami hachi. Rak etz asher teda ze ilan ma'achal, ki lo etz ma'achal hu ze ilan srak, v'chi me'achar shesofen l'rabot kol davar. Mal tumud l'mar, ki lo etz ma'achal, akdim srak l'ma'achal, yichol afilu me'leh b'damim tumud l'marak. Okay, this is a brighter that supports the idea. The main chidush here is that if you have this me'uleh b'damim, and you have a fruit tree and a non-bearing fruit tree, so you should still prioritize cutting down the non-fruit-bearing tree. In other words, you don't say once now it's me'uleh b'damim, there's no difference between the trees. I should still try not to cut down the fruit-bearing tree. I should prioritize the barren tree. But if the barren tree's lumber is not financially feasible, is not financially lucrative for me, and the fruit-bearing tree's lumber is, then I'm allowed to cut down the fruit-bearing tree. Okay, so that's the halacha here. Okay, and then there's a short story here. Shmuel aiti le'arisei tamrei. So Shmuel had a sharecropper who harvested dates. Okay, achil. So Shmuel ate from it. Ta'im behu tamad dechamra, and he tasted wine in the dates. Amarle said to a sharecropper, "My hi," which is a great line. Just what's going on? What is this? What's up? Why is there wine taste in my dates? Amarle bene gufane kaime. So he says the palm trees that grow the dates, there are grapevines that are growing amongst them. And so it's diluting the taste of the dates. So Amar Shmuel said, he says, do the grapevines have that? I didn't know the grapevines had that much of an effect that they can, as it were. Sorry,
it's not kilayim.
I don't know.
No, he just benehem, like he could just be in between.
Yeah, I don't think he's not harvesting them together. Just maybe the grapevines are growing in the area.
It's making flavor into that thing.
That's what he's saying.
Like
So you're right. I don't know if Shmuel's objection here, because he's going to have an objection now, but I don't know if it's because of kilayim or because he just doesn't like the taste or what have you. But it's a good question. I'm not sure. No, meaning it's not that he didn't care about kilayim. It's the question is, does this qualify as kilayim?
It could be that the partner in his crops isn't Jewish and he could do it, and there's a heter. Yeah.
A Jew's allowed to eat kilayim food.
We all do.
That's true. Okay, fair enough.
Loads of stuff we eat nowadays. Clementines, all these, like loads of peach plums, all different types of.
No, but it wasn't kilayim. It's beine gufane kaime. It's just between.
Yeah, but if it's just next,
that's how amazing this story is. Just by being small
in the same area.
No?
Right. That was my understanding. Is it's not.
Either one or the other.
They're not.
Half flavor or it's kilayim.
Meaning, if it was.
It's not that they're grafted together; they're just growing near it.
You
Right.
wouldn't have this question in the first place.
Right. It's that it's next to it, and Shmuel's surprised that despite the fact that it's next to it, it still has enough of an effect to change the taste of the dates. So Shmuel says, "Lamachar aiti lin mukorayu." So he says, tomorrow, basically fix this. Don't let this happen again. So Rav Chisda, and then a similar story. Chazet be gufane. So Rav Chisda saw that there were grapevines also kind of intertwined or next to the palm trees. So Rav Chisda said, Amar le'larise, so he said, Akrinu, uproot the palm trees. Gufane kane dikle lo kane gufane. Why? Because grapevines are more valuable. You can use them to buy new palm trees, but the palm trees are not more valuable, so you can't use them to buy the grapevines. Therefore, if you have to, uproot one of them, so uproot the one that's less expensive. Okay, so just before we get into the agadic part, so just quickly to finalize something on the halacha here. So the Mishnah in Masechet Shvit says as follows: Me'matay en kotzitzin et ha'elam b'shvit. Right, so we've been discussing about tashchit. Here it's talking about shvit, right, where there's a whole separate world of halachot. So at a certain point, you're not allowed to prune trees anymore in the seventh year. Beit Shammai omrim kol eilan mishe yotzi. So Beit Shammai say, whenever each tree produces its fruit, at that point, that's when you're not allowed to cut it down anymore. Beit Hillel omrim hacharuvin mishe yishelshu v'agfanim mishe yigru v'azitim mishe yinitzu mishe yinitzu ushar kol olam mishe Yotzi. So Beit Hillel makes an exception, says there are certain trees where it's not when they produce fruit, but at some earlier process in the production. That for whatever reason, Beit Hillel believes for these other types of trees that the Isur of Shvi'it applies at a different time. Okay, so how much, and now it's talking about Tashchit, which is our idea. So how much does an olive tree need to produce that you're not allowed to cut it down anymore? Rova. A quarter of a kav, which is what we saw in our Gemara Bava Kamma. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel omer hachol lefi azayit. So the reason I brought this is just to show that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is cholek on what our Gemara Bava Kamma takes for granted, that he says it's not a fixed volume, but it depends on the quality of the olives. So it's even more of a subjective call than what we had earlier. That Bal Tashchit, it doesn't seem to be that if it's a fruit-bearing tree in potential, then it's aser, and it doesn't even seem to be that each tree has a different but set volume, but that for Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it's you assess the specific tree and the specific quality of the fruit, and based on that, you decide if now it reaches this level of now you can't destroy it anymore. Okay? Rabbi Bartanura just makes a connection between the two sugyas to say that this is talking about what we were talking about in Bava Kamma. Okay. I wanted to bring, I think, an example that actually is pretty relevant, and this actually, something similar happened to us just actually a couple of months ago.
When? To who?
A couple of months to us. And you'll see in a minute what I'm talking about.
What, the caterpillars?
Oh, yes, actually. But you'll see why. Okay, I'm leaving you in suspense. Rava bar Rav Chanan havu lehanau dikle. Okay, so Rava bar Rav Chanan, he had, this is Gemara of Batrand of Chavav and Aleph.
We still have it today, the caterpillars.
I know. He had palm trees, okay? Amitzra de Pardisa de Rav Yosef, and his land bordered Rav Yosef's property, and Rav Yosef had an orchard, and so his palm trees were on the border, on the edge, in his property, but kind of on the edge of Rav Yosef's property. Havu atu tzipore yadve bedikle, so birds would come, they would land in Rava bar Rav Chanan's palm tree, because there's branches, v'nachte bepardesa umifsedele, and then they would go and eat the grapes or the produce from Rav Yosef's property and consume it and cause him a loss. So before reading on, what should the halacha be in a case like this?
And they wouldn't have attacked the vines if it wasn't palm trees for them to land on?
That's the assumption, yeah. But the palm trees are entirely in Rav bar Rav Chanan's property.
It's Hilchot Shchenim, it's a balagan.
It's Hilchot Shchenim, it's a balagan, right? So what would you decide if it was up to you? What should you do here?
Karaoke.
Ma?
Karaoke.
Incredible. You are playing.
There
Anyway, okay, karaoke. Good. So this is actually classic, not to be mizalzel, but this response of Rav Yosef reminds me of a kiryat. He says, so Amar Le, so he says to Rava bar Rav Chanan, zil kotz, cut down your palm trees, right? Because they're destroying my fruits, the birds. Amar Le, he says, veha archiki le. He says, no, it's in my property. It's not in your property. It's not, I'm not. It's in my area. Leave me alone. Amar le, hani mile lilanot, avalik fanim ba'inan tfei. Rav Yosef says the halacha that says if you're on the edge of your property, that you're not responsible. That's only if you're talking about I have trees and you have trees. But if you have trees and I have grapes, then you need to create more of a distance to ensure this type of thing doesn't happen. So Rav Chanan responded, "Va'anantan, but isn't it taught? Echad kfanim, echad koilan? No, who cares what kind of
Rabbanim fight. This mission says that. This mission says that.
Right, exactly." So Amalei said back to him, "Hani mile ilan leilan kfanim kfanim, aval ilan ligfanim ba'inan tfei." So Ravisi says that braita you brought, if we both had grapes or we both had trees, then you could put it on the edge. But since I have grapes and you have trees, you have to move it further away. So now Rav Chanan does a brilliant move. He says, Amarle, ana lo kaitzina. I'm not going to cut down the palm trees. Why? I'm not allowed to cut down the trees, because if I cut them down, it's bal tashchis. And then reading in between lines, and even if you want to tell me, okay, but this is hilchot shchenim, and you have some sort of chiyuv to cut it down, and halacha would permit you here, similar to how we had before, if it's me'uleh b'damim mutar, so you want to argue to me that here it's mutar because it's causing me hefsed. Amar Rabbi Chanina, lo shachiv shivhat beri, ela deketz taaNtã below zimne. Rabbi Chanina's son died because he cut down a tree. So you're going to get, so you think I'm going to come cut down a palm tree now? Mar im nichale lekots. You're more than welcome to come into my property and cut down the tree if it's such a big burden to you, but I'm not touching it. Okay, and that's how the sugya ends. Like it's not clear who ended up cutting it down or what the story is, but so it's great. It's just an amazing back and forth. What?
There's an argument to say that Bal Tashchis, in theory, it was much more Bal Tashchis to have the ruining of the grape.
Right, which is why I think That's why I think he then brings, like, as a preemptive, and if you're going to say what you just said, I have this Rabbi Chanina statement about his son. What?
Let's see you go cut down my tree.
Yeah, come cut down the tree. Yeah, be my guest, because you're not going to do it. So, what? נראה אם יש לך אומץ, כאילו, כמה זה מפריע לך, right. Anyways, so yeah.
Maybe there's some story about karaoke and whatever, something happened.
It's funny you should say that. En Yaakov on the next page.
Yeah, no, we have a situation with our neighbors also where we're growing vines. Actually, we're growing vines and they're claiming it's bringing bugs into their yard. What?
You didn't tell us your story.
Saying, so we planted these vines and they're growing up onto the wall. And they're claiming it. They claimed it's bringing bugs and infesting the shetach. What? They said zilkots. They literally texted me said zilkots. Cut down the vines now. And I tried to pull Rav Chanan and kind of went like this. I said, well, they leave a pool open all summer and blast karaoke. So I'm like, you think if the open water, the still water, the whole summer doesn't bring the bugs, I don't complain. Now you're going to complain about the vines. Anyways, a whole back and forth. I should have said, you're welcome to come cut them down if you want. That's right. But they would have done it. That's a problem. They would have called my bluff like this. That would not have been a good idea. In a second. It was okay. Yeah, right. That's why I wonder what the next line in this story is. Should have said if he actually did it or not. But, okay.
He didn't.
Yeah, I mean a palm tree is harder to cut down than uproot a grapevine, but anyway.
Very small, they know.
Yeah. Okay, we are. Oh, Eitz Yosef. Okay, what does the Eitz Yosef have to say? Okay, now we're going to talk about this Shivhat Beri, right? So I misled you guys a little bit. I said Rabbi Chanina says my son Shivhat. The only reason he died was because he cut down a tree, at the improper time. But look at what the Eitz Yosef says. Perish Rashi kach shemo. Okay. So Rashi says that was his name. So what does that mean that was his name? Shamati Omer. So the Eitz Yosef says I heard people say shekavanat Rashi lomar shelav beno haya. It doesn't mean that he was Rabbi Chanina's son. Ushmo Shivhat or Shivhat. There's a different gersah of the name. Right? It doesn't mean Shivhat Beri, my son Shivhat. Why? Right? What? Rabbi Chanina's son didn't know these halachot of Bal Tashchis? Of course he couldn't have sinned in that way. It was some random guy whose name was Shivhat Beri. So Rabbi Chanina is saying Shivhat Beri didn't pass away, except the fact that he cut down his tree prematurely. But he's not reflecting on something that happened in his own family.
The reason Rashi has to do that is because how could he do that?
That's not what Rashi says. That's what some person who the Eitz Yosef is quoting as explaining Rashi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he doesn't. The Eitz Yosef doesn't say who makes that argument. Rashi just says that was his name, but it's not really clear if Rashi's saying that was his name, meaning Shivhat Beri, the entire thing, or his name was Shivhat. But Rashi doesn't really clarify anything for you. So this later commentary comes and says Rashi must mean Shivhat Beri was his name. And it's because why does Rashi think that? It can't be that Rabbi Chanina's son did Bal Tashchit. We're about to see a much better.
What?
You made a good joke. It was good. Okay. ולכן לא כתב Rashi שכחת כך שמו. Yeah, he's medayek in Rashi's language. That's what he means. But it just have notes here at the end. V'ne'elam mimenu ma shekatav Rashban v'Bava Kamma daf kuf chaf vav amud bet dibra Shivhat Beri. That basically the Rashbam has a much better argument, and it's I think irrefutable, and we're about to see it. But first we have to learn the previous Gemara, which is Bava Kamma daf kuf chaf vav amud bet. Amar of Yosef. This Gemara in Bava Batra, it's dealing with the halachot of the Bechorav, the firstborn of, he gets a double portion. Yeah, Tafim is exactly. So Rav Yosef says, Amar, if a person says, Ish ploni bani, right, person so-and-so is my son, the person so-and-so who is my son, Bechori, who is my firstborn son, Nozel Pishnaim. You believe the man to claim that person so-and-so is his firstborn. But Ish Ploni Bechorhu, but if I say about David Moshe's son that he's the firstborn son, Eino Notel Pishnaim. He doesn't get to take the firstborn. Why? Dilma Bukhar Dima Kamar. Because it could be that when I said that he's your firstborn, so I'm talking about from the mother, but not necessarily from the father. I can't assume that it's not from the father. Whereas if I testify about my own son, say he's Bechori, so it's talking about me, the father, right? Someone came before Bava Kamma. Amar le said to him, he said, I know person so and so is a Bechor. So Bava Kamma responded, said, Amar le minayadata, how do you know? And he said, Dahava kari le avua buchra sichla. So he says, because I heard that person's father calling him foolish firstborn. So I know that he's the firstborn. But Rabbi Bava Kamma responds, Dilma buchra di'imahu, B'kol buchra di'ima nami buchra sichla karule. That doesn't clarify anything because he could have been referring to the firstborn of the mother, and Dafka makes sense that a father would say to his firstborn, "Oh, you foolish firstborn," but not talking about his own, but about from his stepsons or the firstborn of the mother. So Rabbi Kamma does not accept this testimony. Case number 2. Ahuda ata l'kamid Rabbi Chanina. Someone came before Rabbi Chanina. Amar le muchzakani b'zeshu b'chor. Similar point. Person so and so is a firstborn. Amar le m'nayadata. How do you know? Amar le. Because when people would go before the father of this person who I'm testifying about, Amar Lahu, he would say to them, Zilu legabe Shivhat Beri, de bucharhu mase ruke. So his father would say, you should go to my son, Shivhat, because he's a firstborn, and his spit heals. If they had an eye infection, he would spit in their eye, and it would make their eye feel better. So the Gemara has a similar question. V'dilma buchra di'imahu. But how does that testimony clarify that it's his firstborn? Gemire, we have a tradition, a mesora. Buchra de'aba maseruke, buchra di'imahu maseruke. If the firstborn son of a father spits in your eye, it heals an eye infection. But the firstborn son of a mother spits in your eye, it doesn't heal the eye infection. We have that as a gemire. Okay? But what does this Gemara show us?
He has a son.
Who has a son? Shivhat Beri.
Rabbi Chanina.
No, read it carefully.
Oh.
Someone
came before Rabbi Chanina, right? Someone came before Rabbi Chanina and said, person so-and-so has a firstborn son in Bechor. Rabbi Chanina says, how do you know? He says, because that person... That so-and-so who I'm testifying about, that Bechor, is Shivhat. And the father called him his firstborn. But he's talking to Rabbi Chanina. So So it must be that it's not Rabbi Chanina's son, because Rabbi Chanina wouldn't need a testimony about him himself saying, my son spits in people's eyes and heals them. Right? Does that make sense? So that's the Rashbam's argument. He says, Shema Bechor, his name was Shivhat Beri, v'lav hainu Berei de Rabbi Chanina. He's not the son of Rabbi Chanina, as it says back in Bava Kamma, lo Shakhiv Shivhat Beri, ela deketz tentam zman. In other words, it's Yosef above, he said, is it that it was the son of Rabbi Chanina whose name was Shivchat, or is the full name Shivhat Beri? And he said the full name was Shivhat Beri, and he wasn't Rabbi Chanina's son. How do I know? Because there's no way Rabbi Chanina's son would have ever cut down a palm tree and done Bal Tashchit. Rashbam says, what are you coming up with that whole Eichatimtza? This Gemara here clearly shows Rabbi Chanina receiving a testimony about some other person whose name was Shivhat Beri. So, assuming that the Shivhat Beri in Bava Batra Kuf Chav Vav is the same person as the Shivhat Beri in our Gemara, it's clear that Rabbi Chanina was not the father, and therefore you have to understand it, that it was Shivhat Beri was the name and not his firstborn, and not his son. That was just good, some lumdus there. Okay. If we look at the Iyun Yaakov, given all that, the Iyun Yaakov, I have to say, given the shir now for a few years, the Iyun Yaakov is my favorite commentary that we learn midday palm. He always seems to have really sharp insights. And here specifically, katonti, but I don't understand what he's saying here, because what we just saw in the name of the Rashbam and in the Eitz Yosef, that was like, it has to be that the Shivhat Beri is a different person, and it's not that it was Rabbi Chanina's son. And that's the argument that the Rashbam makes. If you look at the Iyun Yaakov, where he says, Lo Shachiv Shivhat Beri, on the right side, so he says, V'yesh lomar remez v'siman davar, so a hint to this idea is, Notzar te'ena yochal kriya. There's the pasuk which says, someone who plants a fig tree will merit to eat the fruit. It's just this general idea that you have to put in the work and then you'll reap the azorim b'dima b'ri type of thing. You'll get the benefit. So why is that a support? But if you don't plant a fig tree, but rather you cut a fig tree down, so you won't get to eat the fruit of the tree. And he says, and the offspring of Abraham are compared to figs, as it says in Midrash so-and-so. What I think he's saying, and it could be that I don't want to be to say something bad about the Iyun Yaakov if I'm misunderstanding him. What I think he's saying is, Lo Shachiv Shivcha Beri El Deketz Tenta Below Zmana. He's saying that the fact that Beri Shivcha died was because the tree was not planted properly, in the sense that Rabbi Chanina himself had done something wrong, and so his offspring were killed as a result. Just like you cut down the fig tree, you lose the fruit, because you're not supposed to cut down the fig tree, because then you lose the fruit. So Rabbi Chanina is testifying, my son, Shivhat Beri, in other words, he's saying, it's a metaphor for him saying that he died as a result of my sins. Okay? That's how the Iyun Yaakov is understanding this.
That only works if
it's his actual son, which seems to go against how the Rashbam and the Eitz Yosef understand the Gemara. But of course, the Iyun Yaakov is also interpreting what Rabbi Chanina says metaphorically instead of literally, right? Which is also like my son. Yeah, I guess so. Like my right.
In this explanation, who cut down the tree? Of Chanina.
Rabbi Chanina. So he's testifying on himself.
Don't go
that I must have done. In other words, but unless I'm misunderstanding what the Iyun Yaakov is implying here, but my way of understanding him is when Amar Rabbi Chanina lo shachiv Shivhat Beri al deketz tenta below zmana, is that he's saying something of the other issue with the Iyun Yaakov's understanding is that it's in the context of a very halachic discussion about tashchid. So it's weird to bring in some metaphorical idea about a fig versus what we understood before, where he's saying, no, this person died because he didn't fulfill the halacha of Bal Tashchid properly. Or he didn't fulfill the spirit of the law.
The question is, why is he saying, Ela dekatz te'anata below zmana? So does it mean that we have a time and we can
cut it down?
Yeah, before
for what?
it has fruit.
So very good. Great question. That takes us to the last series of Midrashim, which would actually support the Iyun Yaakov's assertion that this is maybe leaning into something a bit more agadic and ethical versus a halachic way of understanding. So what does it mean, below zmana? So we'll see right now what that means. Let's skip the Marashal for a second, just in the interest of time. If we go to the Alkut Shimoni, so it says, Mai dichtiv ki adam etz hasadeh. So when it comes to Bal Tashchit, we know it says a person is a tree of the field. וכי האדם עץ השדה הוא, אלא משום דכתיב כי ממנו תאכל ואותו לא תכרות, וכתיב אותו תשחית וקראת, הכיצד? אם תלמיד חכם הגון הוא, ממנו תאכל ואותו לא תכרות. So it says, כי האדם עץ השדה means that this idea of not cutting down a fruit-bearing tree is a metaphor for not cutting down people who bear fruit, meaning Talmidei Chachamim, right? So if he is a Talmid Chacham, so you should eat from him. In other words, you should learn Torah, you should, glean from his Torah. But if he's not Talmid Chacham, whatever this means, you can cut him down. Just like if I have a small twigs, the kindling from those can light a big tree on fire. So they can even, students can sharpen the minds of great scholars. And I think it's just a coincidence it's Rabbi Chanina here. Right? This is a famous idea that Rabbi Chanina learned the most Torah from his students. So here in this Yalkut Shimoni we have the first taste of this idea that Ki Adam Eitz HaSadeh, even within, there's this whole halachic world of Bal Tashchit, but it's also the idea of not cutting down fruit-bearing trees. Also, there's a whole wealth of agadic material that you can glean from that. And we're going to tie it now to the cutting it down before it's time. The Gemara in Chagir and Daf Hei Amud Aleph says as follows: Rabbi Yochanan Yom Achad Hava Ka'azil Be'orcha. One time Rabbi Yochanan was walking along the way. Chazye lehu gavra tehava mankit te'enei. So he saw a guy who was harvesting figs. And something strange, the person was taking off the figs that were already, that were not yet ripe, and he was leaving the figs that were ripe on the tree. Right? Normally you take the ripe figs. So Amar Lei, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Lav, hani ma'alin tfei, wouldn't it make more sense to take the ripe figs from the tree? Amar Lei, so the man said to him, Hani la'orcha ba'inan lahu. Hani nitran, vani lo nitran. He says, I'm about to go on a long journey. So if I take the ripe ones, by the time I go on the journey, they will have already spoiled. So I'm taking the non-ripe ones because I'm not going to eat them now. I'm going to eat them later, and by then they'll ripen. So Rabbi Yochanan said, Amar, Hainu dichtiv hen b'kedoshav lo ya'amin. That this is a pasuk that Kivyachol Hashem does not trust His holy ones. That what this means is that sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes away His kedoshav from the world below Zmanan, so that they can be taken adayin b'tara before they do something wrong. In other words, he doesn't trust that they'll be able to maintain their purity for forever. So he takes them when they're not yet ripe, but they're still in a state of purity before they mature and get rotten after they ripen.
מי זה הרב שהבן שלו נפטר? כשהוא היה ילד. הופיע בגמרא, ואז הוא אמר, אחרי שהוא נפטר, יגד הסם נקודה על חטאים, ונזכרים בהקודה על חטאים, אז אמרו ניחמתני.
רבי מאיר אולי?
לא זוכר.
Okay. Yeah. So based on this, we can maybe understand lo shachtiv Shivhat Beri el dekates taaNtA below zmana in this light. That what does it mean to be taken before your time as a parallel to a fig tree? This is what Rabbi Yochanan is the complete opposite of how I understood the Yun Yaakov. Right? That the reason when Rabbi Chanina is saying Shachid Beri was taken before his time, it's like Rabbi Yochanan, and the reason why this makes sense as an analogy is because Rabbi Yochanan is specifically talking about fig trees. He sees a man picking figs, and he derives from that this idea. So when Rabbi Chanina also says Lo Shachid Beri Kates taaNtA below zmana, it makes sense to say there's this idea that like the fig tree is analogous, that they ripen or before they ripen, to saying that tzaddikim or kedoshim are taken before their time. I know we're running over, but maybe we can just do these last Chagiga Daf Hey. We can do these last two midrashim because they shed a bit more light on this mahalach that we just did. So Kohel Rabba Hey Yud Aleph. Ma ben mitat ne'arim to mitat zkenim. What's the difference between those who die young and those who die old, or of old age? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia. It's a machloket. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. הנר הזה בזמן שהוא קיבה מאליו, טוב לו וטוב לפתילה, בזמן שאינו קיבה מאליו, טוב רב ולא לפתילה. When you have a candle, if the candle just burns out, right, the wick burns until it finally fizzles out, So that's good for the candle and it's good for the wick, right? That's like a healthy way for the candle to be used up. But if a wind comes and blows out the flame in the middle, so it's not good for the candle, not good for the wick. So too, if a person lives a full, healthy life and their neshama ends up getting snuffed out, so that's good. But if someone gets taken before their time, there's something about that that's bad. Rabbi Nechemia Omer HaTe'ena Azot. He brings the analogy of a fig tree. So when you harvest the figs in the right season, when they're at the right level of ripeness, but if they're taken before their time, it's bad for the fig tree. So wait, but what about the story of Rabbi Chia Rabbah and his students? What's that story? Okay, we're not clear which rabbi this is talking about, but him and his students, they were sitting one time underneath a fig tree. So they were sitting there and learning, and the owner of the fig tree would come in the mornings and he would harvest the figs. Amru, so they said, so they thought, we're sitting under this tree and the owner of the fig tree is looking at us and saying, maybe they're taking stuff. So he's coming and harvesting the figs. So let's move somewhere else so he doesn't suspect us. They went to go sit somewhere else. The next morning, the owner of the tree got up and he didn't see them under the tree. He looked for them until he found them. Amar lehem, he said to them, Rabbi Isai, mitzvah chada havitun avdin imi min aton yate mini. He says, I have one mitzvah, and my mitzvah is that I am in charge of the fig tree that you sit under and learn Torah. And now you've taken that mitzvah away from me? Right? Amrin, so they said to him, Chas v'shalom. Of course not. So Amar lon, so he said to them, so why did you leave and go sit somewhere else? They said to him, because we thought maybe you suspected that we were stealing your figs, which is because every morning you wake up and you take the figs. He says, no, that's not what was going on. Why was I waking up early and taking the figs? It had nothing to do with you. Rather, because if the sun, rises and shines on the fig trees, they become full of worms. They spoil. So I need to wake up early and harvest them so that so I can get them before they get ruined. And to prove it, so that day he didn't harvest them. And they saw that they actually did get ruined. So he had only pure intentions. So Amren, so they say, based on this, Yafeh ba'al te'ena. So praiseworthy is the owner of the fig tree. Yodea onatasho te'nato. He knows what the right time to take the fig is. Ematai ru'ya lilket v'ulokta. When the right time to take it, he takes it, and he doesn't leave it for too long. Kach HaKadosh Baruch Hu yodea matai higia onato shetzadik u'misalko. So again, the fig is comparable to a tzaddik, and sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu harvests the fig at the time that he knows is best for that fig, even if the fig has not lived out its life fully, in contrast to what Rabbi Nechemia said before, that, it's good when the fig reaches its full thing and it's taken. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows when the right time to take the figs, which is again the similar idea that sometimes tzaddikim are harvested early, kivyachol, and maybe that's what happened with Shivhat Beri. And just this last midrash here, Kanavim b'midmar tzat Yisrael ki b'chora v'teina b'reshita v'gom Rabbi Yudan hateina azo b'tchila orim ota achat achat. Again, a comparison to figs, that when figs, they grow in these clusters, right? You imagine the fig, so it's when they first start growing, so you harvest them one at a time. But then they start growing in these clusters that you have more than one, so you harvest them two at a time, then three at a time. Then you just take the whole cluster once it's mature enough. First, it was just Avram Avinu. He inherited Eretz Yisrael. So Bnei Yisrael are compared to fig trees, and figs in terms of the way that they grow. That they become very numerous very quickly. And you eat the entire fig except for the stem. So, right, that Hashem said to Avraham Avinu, you're like a fig, that you're entirely pure, entirely consumable, except for your orla, your foreskin. Ha'averotah batelamum, get rid of it. To bris milah, just like you take off the stem and you're able to eat the whole fig. Yitalech lefanai ve'yatamim. So we see here a bit of a different angle, but also comparing figs to Bnei Yisrael and to the Avot. So we see that throughout Shas, there's this idea of comparing figs to Bnei Yisrael, and perhaps that is how we are meant to understand. Amar B'chinin lo shechif Shivhat Beri dedicates Taanetha below Zmana, that Hafuch, as you said earlier, Hafuch from Yun Yaakov, who seems to be implying that Rabbi Chanina is testifying on himself that due to his sins, his son died prematurely, but maybe that he was such a big tzaddik that that's why he was taken before his time, but still understanding this line as being metaphorical and the Te'ena being a metaphor for a tzaddik instead of the literal Baal Tashchit application within which it's found in the Gemara.
Or he's agreeing with the Shita in the beginning of the Mishnah that if there's a good reason, you do cut it down earlier.
Say it again.
The only reason Shivhat Beri died was because he was cut in his time. There was Hashem had a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's agreeing with the earlier statement in the Mishnah that if there's a financial purpose, you do cut it early. Supporting it.
Okay. So in that read, interesting, because I had said, okay, very good. Rabbi Chanina, where we had said Rabbi Chanina, if we understand him making a halachic statement, as saying, my son only died because he cut down a tree. And Ravina said, but you're allowed to if it's financially, so they're arguing with each other. In other words, he says, if you're allowed to financially, but he says, but you still shouldn't do it, because it's Baal Tashchit, even if it's financially okay, that there's a stira. But you're arguing, if you understand Rabbi Chanina as like an agadic statement, that Rabbi Chanina is coming to support him and not argue on him.
Yeah.
So it's totally like misreading the, yeah, good.
Does it make sense? Does it fit?
If Rabbi Chanina is saying, my son only died because, like Rabbi Yochanan said, he was a fig that was harvested before his time, because hen b'kedoshav lo ya'amin. And then Rabbi Chanina would say, Ravina is testifying about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? If Shivhat Beri was me'uleh b'damim, maybe you can understand his blood, Kilu. His blood was pure. It's allowed to take him early. Like, you're allowed to take a tzaddik early if he's a me'uleh b'damim person. Yeah, that's quite a read. That's very good. What?
Damim never means blood.
Okay, well, all right.
We can get away with it. That was San out here. Jonathan comes. Damim never means blood.
Damim means money.
I understand.
Doesn't mean blood.
So it's the May.
לא תשים דמים בביתך.
בגמרא.
שפך דמים. Wow.
Someone who spills money. It's a big sin.
Shimon does it all the time.
Right, my son only died because he was a tzaddik and he had to die early. And it's allowed to do that. Kiviyachol, Hashem is permitted to take away a tzaddik before his time. Because how could Hashem do that if he was me'uleh b'damim? I like it.
It's completely like opposite of Pshat.
Yeah. Right.
That's why it's even more correct.
Right.
Brie. Cheers.
Yes. French. Rashi.
French Rashi.
French Rashi.
That's why I said it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Gosh.